One day a young man went to see a counselor. He'd been really kind of down, made some poor decisions, suffered consequences because of those poor decisions. And so in a state of despair and kind of dealing with depression, he decided to ask for him to go see a counselor. So he went, saw the counselor, sat down in front of the counselor, and began to share with the counselor the poor decisions that he had made and some of the consequences that he had suffered because of those poor decisions. Now, as this young man shared with the counselor, he blamed no one else but himself. The decisions that were made and the consequences that had now kind of brought him down. But the young man kept talking, and finally, after listening for a period of time, the counselor said, "I want you to stop talking for a second. Your situation is similar to the situation that I've experienced with other people who have been coming in recently to visit with me." After saying that, he said, "I want you to listen to a CD that I've made. And on this CD, there are 3 other individuals who are going to talk a little bit about their circumstances that have led them to come and see me." The counselor said, "Now, as you listen to these 3 people talk about their situations, I want you to try and listen for a 2-word phrase that these people have used in their narration." Interestingly enough, said the counselor, you have used that same 2-word phrase about 7 times in the course of our conversation. And that's why I want you to listen. Having said that, the counselor put the CD into the CD player and turned it on. The first person that this young man listened to was a businessman who lost his business. And as he talked about losing his business, he talked about not putting forth 100%, being lazy, making some poor financial decisions. The second person on the CD was a middle-aged woman. She had passed by 3 opportunities to get married because she felt compelled to care for her single, disabled mother. And now that her mother was dead, she was alone. And as she talked, she berated herself for passing by on those opportunities to be married. And the third person that this young man listened to was that of a mother whose son was in prison. She blamed herself for him being in prison. After listening to these 3 people speak, the counselor stopped the CD. And then he looked at the young man and he said, "Did you hear the 2-letter phrase that kept reoccurring? That 2-letter phrase is a poison to these people in their system. That 2-letter phrase is keeping them from knowing health and moving forward." The young man said, "I'm sorry, but I didn't pick up on that 2-letter phrase." The counselor said, "That 2-letter phrase is if only." The problem with using if only, said the counselor, is that it changes nothing in your life. The problem with using if only, said the counselor, is that it keeps a person facing backwards into the past. And as long as they're facing backwards, focused on the past, saying if only, it means that they will not be able to turn and embrace the present and the future. You would be surprised, said the counselor, how often I hear the words if only in this office. Now, over the years of doing pastoral ministry, Like that counselor, I have to say, I too have heard a lot of if-onlys in my office. If only I'd gone to college, Pastor. If only I hadn't taken that drink that night. If only I'd stayed on the family farm. If only I hadn't quit my job. If only. People, as they say, if only, just beat themselves up. And for some reason, you just can't seem to get beyond what has happened. Now, maybe some of you are struggling right now with the words, if only. Maybe some of you are still caught up on some event that took place in your past. And every now and then, it comes back up. And you think to yourself, if only I would have. And it holds you down, holds you there. Now, if you struggle sometimes with that word, if only, or that phrase, if only, then you need to hear again what Paul said in a moment of self-reflection as he writes the church at Philippi. Let me read it to you once again. Paul said this, forgetting what is behind and straining towards what is ahead, I press on to the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. Now, that phrase is amazing. Paul says, forgetting what lies behind, he's talking about himself, and straining towards what is ahead, I press on. Now, why is that phrase so striking for Paul? Well, if you know about Paul, you know that he was not a very good guy at one time in his life. If you know about Paul, you know he had a ton of mistakes that he made when he was persecuting Christians. Separated families, had husbands and wives thrown into prison. In one of Paul's letters, he strongly suggests that he placed in motion decisions that ultimately cost Christians their life. Now think about that. There was a ton of baggage that Paul had to carry, knowing what he was like before he became a Christian. If you've been watching Mona Downey's television series, A.D. the Bible, which is based on the book of Acts, Sunday nights, 8 o'clock, NBC. I've been encouraging the Bible study class to watch the series. It's well done, based on Acts. Well, if you've been watching that series over the last 3 Sundays, the focus has primarily been on Paul. And the very first Sunday that Paul was brought into the focus, he was, of course, Saul. And if you watch that television series, you have some images now of the kind of person that Saul probably was when he was Saul persecuting Christians. Arrogant, hard-hearted, not caring that families are being displaced, not caring that husbands and wives are being put in jail, not caring that he made decisions that probably did cost a number of Christians their lives. That's the way Saul was. So how did he come to the point of dealing with it? Yes, he became a Christian, but yet still all that past baggage he's got to deal with. How did he come to the point of saying these words, forgetting what is behind, I now press on? How did Paul manage to make that transition? How did he get by all those if only moments? Well, when you study the book of Acts, you begin to see. Paul was able to get by those if-only moments because he drew close to God. And he walked with God in prayer and worship. And he studied God's words. And somehow, as Paul walked close with God, he began to deal with all that baggage in his past. As he walked closely with God, Paul obviously found the ability to receive God's forgiveness, to forgive himself. He found the ability to turn and start looking at the present and moving on into the future. And that's why Paul eventually is able to say, forgetting what lies behind, I now press on. So, if you struggle with some of those if-only kind of situations that still keep coming back, that still keep haunting you, that still kind of drag you down for a day or a month or longer than that, then follow Paul's example. And when those moments come back and haunt you, those if-only events, when you start feeling like you're under their burden, then draw close to God and talk to God. Allow God to care for you and minister to you and help you move to the point where you can forgive yourself. I'm sure it took Paul a long time before he finally came to that point, but he made it. And we can do the same. We can come to the point where we move beyond some of those mistakes that we made. And we'll probably always remember those mistakes, but the emotion, the hurt, the pain, the embarrassment, the guilt, those emotions will be gone. And it'll be just a bland, neutral memory. So with God's help, we can, as Paul said, forget what lies behind and press on toward what lies ahead. With God's help, we can move away from if only. And when we begin to move away from if only, then we embrace another phrase. And that phrase is the next time. When we move from the past, we embrace the next time. And when a person begins to embrace the next time, it means that they've integrated the wisdom that they learned from those if-only mistakes in the past. And with that wisdom integrated into who we are, we're now better prepared not to make those mistakes again in the future. If only we can transition into the next time with God's help. A number of years ago, one of my parishioners in the church that I was serving came to see me. As soon as he walked in the office, I knew this was not good. Walked in, sat down in the chair across from me. He was a local funeral director in the community where the church was. Civic leader. Good member of the church. Sang lead in the men's quartet that sang in that particular church. So I brushed shoulders with him often.